I was hit by a car and suffered a head injury. The doctor told me I might develop amnesia. Jokingly, I asked the boyfriend sitting by my bedside who he was. He paused for a moment and said, "We're just friends." I stared at Jack, who sat there and uttered the words "just friends" with a distant, indifferent expression. He didn't look like he was joking. The words "got you" were stuck in my throat, and I could only watch him silently. I figured if the doctor hadn't called him, he probably wouldn't have come to the hospital at all. But I didn't question him. I paused briefly and forced a nonchalant smile. "Is that so? That's really kind of you." He responded with a cold, as if I was wasting his time. Then he glanced at his phone and said, "Now that you're awake, I'll head out. I've got work at the office." Before I could even process what was happening, he got up to leave. As he opened the door, perhaps out of some lingering sense of conscience, he turned back to say, "Get some rest." The smile on my face only faded after he closed the door behind him. My expression turned blank, and one knew Jack and I were in a relationship. Ours was a campus romance. After graduation, we moved to Chicago together and landed jobs at the top marketing firm in H City. Back then, we were young but already understood that workplace relationships were frowned upon, so we tacitly agreed to keep our relationship a secret. 4 years later, we both got promoted to business managers, each leading different departments that often competed. At that point, revealing our relationship became even more impossible. And so, we remained a secret couple that I had hesitated before and asked Jack whether we should go public since there wasn't an explicit company policy against dating. But every time, he would brush me off absent-mindedly. I wasn't even sure if we still counted as a couple anymore. Well, today I finally got my answer. The doctor told Jack I might experience temporary memory loss but assured him I'd recover soon. Even so, in this situation that lacked any real logic, he still looked me in the eye and said we were just friends. Perhaps he wasn't afraid of my memory coming back to confront him. He didn't care if I had amnesia or if I was joking with him. He had probably already wanted to break up. After all, how else could he openly pursue Rose? A woman's intuition is often sharper than any radar. To be honest, my relationship with Jack had already grown dull. We had been together too long, 7 years, since our sophomore year in college. We knew each other as well as we knew the lines on our palms. That's why I could immediately sense any change in him. The clues started when a new intern joined his department, Rose, a pretty and fresh-faced girl. The HR manager, who liked to gossip, once mentioned to me that Rose had listed her father as James Smith on her entry form, none other than the owner of our company. A wealthy and beautiful second-generation heiress working in her father's company. At first, Jack explained his special treatment of Rose like this: "I can't afford to offend her. Besides, she's just a childish girl, not my type." "You're overthinking it." I didn't point out that this childish girl was 2 years older than me. I silently accepted his excuse. Later, I couldn't tell whether he didn't take me seriously or simply didn't bother hiding anything anymore. Within 2 weeks of Rose joining, one day I logged into his rarely used music account to find a background track. I noticed that he and Rose were following each other. Jack hadn't listened to music much in recent years because of work. That account was one we shared during our college days. Back then, we spent 13,896 hours listening to music together. He even made a playlist named after me, filled with songs that reminded him of me, my favorite artists, songs I posted on social media, and tracks he played during long-distance holidays when he missed me. I checked. He had deleted that playlist. In the recent song history on his music account, I noticed tracks Rose often listens to, trendy Korean pop songs that Jack wouldn't typically be interested in. Since we both work in marketing, I convinced myself he was just trying to stay relevant with younger trends, and maybe I was overthinking it. So, I quietly logged out of his account without saying anything. I'm not the kind of person to raise accusations without solid evidence. After all, the person who remains composed and says the least at the table is often the one who lasts the longest. Of course, the coincidences and understanding between Jack and Rose didn't stop there. In early February, Jack's project team took on a new assignment. At the time, I was out of town handling another project with my team, and all I heard was that Jack's project involved a notoriously difficult British client. After a long, busy day without time to eat, I called Jack to ask about his progress. He didn't answer, likely busy, so I sent him a text. He never replied. Later, I saw his team photo on his social media. Rose was standing next to him, flashing a peace sign and a radiant smile. The project seemed to be going smoothly. Jack's caption read, "Know yourself and your opponent." Coincidentally, Rose posted a similar photo with the caption, "Victory assured." Clicking into her profile, I noticed their matching WeChat statuses echoing the same sentiment, like an unspoken bond between them during this project. Jack's old WeChat status had been a poetic line: "Raise the sails at the quarry and gather the moon by the sea." It was inspired by my name, Summer Jones. I wondered if he remembered me when he changed it, though the answer was likely no. He hadn't responded to my call or my text, but I saw he commented on Rose's post, "Eat something soon. Take care of your stomach." I glanced at my own growling, aching stomach, and closed my phone. That was the second thing I chose to let slide. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. The doctor confirmed there were no issues, so they allowed me to leave. Throughout my stay, Jack hadn't sent me a single message. A bouquet of cappuccino roses was delivered, though my favorite. Holding them in my arms, I decided to give Jack one more chance. I sat in the hospital corridor and called him. It rang for a while before he answered. I asked softly, "Jack, I'm being discharged today. Do you have time to pick me up?" We both tacitly avoided mentioning the memory loss or just friends incident, as if it never happened. He was silent for a moment before saying, "I'm sorry, Summer. I'm really busy and can't step away. How about I arrange a car for you?" "What are you busy with?" I asked calmly. He hesitated, likely surprised. I rarely pressed him for answers, knowing how to avoid unnecessary friction. But I also knew that this was our quietest time at work since we had just wrapped up our first projects of the year. Yet he claimed to be busy. He didn't reply. I sighed and hung up the phone myself. A man's love, or lack thereof, is often blatantly obvious. I remember when we first started working after graduation. One night, I had a severe case of gastritis at 3 a.m. and fainted. I managed to call Jack before losing consciousness. When I woke up, he was sitting by my hospital bed, his eyes red. One foot wore a slipper, the other a mismatched sneaker. Both were for the left foot. I couldn't help but laugh weakly. He looked panicked, and his eyes reddened further. "Laugh all you want. When I opened the door and saw you collapsed, I nearly had a heart attack. Next time, call 911 first." What if I hadn't answered your call? It was so dangerous. I looked up at him, smiling and full of trust. "But in my heart, you're the safest person." He once cared so deeply for me. We once had such a beautiful, genuine love. Even if it's all but unrecognizable now, these distant memories still bring a faint, self-deprecating smile to my lips. I shook my head and tossed the bouquet of cappuccino roses into a nearby trash can. "Not a fan of the flowers?" someone behind me asked. I turned to see an unfamiliar man, pointing at the bouquet in the trash. Apologetically, he said, "I'm sorry. I'm the driver who accidentally hit you the other day. I took you to the hospital and contacted your emergency contact, but I had to leave due to work. This is a discharge gift, and I've covered all your medical bills. If you need anything else, feel free to let me know." I froze, then let out a bitter laugh. Even the flowers had been from a stranger. Looking up at him, I gave a polite smile and apologized. "I'm sorry. I thought they were from someone else." Insight. I've always been someone who values reason and composure. But good manners don't mean I'm weak or a pushover. It's over between Jack and me. Truly over. When I returned from the hospital, Jack was already home. As I opened the door and walked in, he was sitting on the couch. The TV was on, playing a variety show he wouldn't usually care about. His attention was focused on his phone, typing away, with a faint smile on his lips. The dim light of the phone illuminated his face, giving it an unexpectedly gentle look. I couldn't remember the last time I had seen such a tender expression on his face. I stood still by the door. He was so engrossed that he didn't even notice the sound of the door opening. It wasn't until I softly called his name, Jack, that he raised his head abruptly, the smile on his face vanishing. My gaze fell to his hands. Startled, he instinctively locked his phone and placed it face down on the couch. He looked at me with surprise, asking, "You're discharged already?" At that moment, I finally smiled, not for joy, but with a sense of irony, at him and at myself. Looking at him calmly, I spoke in a distant and soft tone. "We need to talk." Our breakup could be described as peaceful. We were both composed individuals, and the process didn't take long. As mature adults, everything was laid bare. There wasn't much to discuss. We both understood after I said, "Let's break up." He didn't ask why. He simply fell silent. I imagine he might have even felt a sense of relief in that instant. After a while, he muttered a quiet, "I'm sorry." I didn't accept his apology. Instead, I remained calm, methodically addressing the logistics of our separation. My tone was steady, my demeanor devoid of sadness. My composure seemed to catch Jack off guard. When I suggested he move out soon, he suddenly interrupted me and asked, "Summer, you don't seem sad at all." His brows furrowed slightly, his gaze focused on my face, curious and probing, as if he couldn't understand. Men are truly ridiculous creatures. Even when they stop loving you, even when a breakup is the outcome they've been yearning for, they find it unsettling if you face it with such poise. Perhaps, in his mind, I should have been tearfully begging him to stay, pleading desperately. Only then would he feel a twinge of satisfaction amidst his irritation. I raised my eyes to meet his, expressionless. I didn't tell him that I had already been sad, many times over, when he ignored my messages but left comments under Rose's posts right after she shared them, when he deleted the playlist he had made for me, just so he could listen to the trendy songs Rose liked, when he looked me in the eye, pretending to have amnesia, and told me we were just ordinary friends. When he immersed himself in the subtle, ambiguous pull of adult flirtation with Rose in places I couldn't see, I had already mourned. To me, Jack was like a benign tumor growing inside my body. It wasn't life-threatening, but I knew that if left untreated, it would slowly worsen, eroding my health and vitality bit by bit. There was nothing to fear. As long as it was still benign, I just had to remove it, root and all. The pain would only last a while, but in the end, I would heal. Before Jack left with his belongings, I asked him one last question in a calm, detached voice. "Jack, did you fall out of love with me because Rose is Smith Spring's daughter, or simply because she's who she is?" Standing at the doorway, he turned to look at me. He was still tall and handsome, just like the first time I saw him in college. Back then, his face had the bashful innocence of youth. Now, it bore the quiet maturity of someone who had navigated the deep waters of self-interest. I had always thought he was still that boy who had stood on the track field, blushing as he awkwardly confessed to me. It wasn't until this moment that I realized he had long since become a man weighed down by the calculations and compromises of adulthood. He paused before replying, "Summer, people always aim to climb higher." His words made me chuckle wryly, though I had to give him credit for his candor. I looked at him and genuinely smiled. "Jack, then I wish you success and fulfillment of your ambitions." His gaze lingered on my face, and a faint regret flickered deep in his eyes. However, compared to his lofty aspirations, that regret was likely insignificant. Finally, he sighed and said, "Summer, don't hate me." I didn't respond. The downside of an office romance is that after a breakup, there's no graceful way to forget each other and move on. No matter what, life goes on and work continues. When the taxi pulled up outside the company building, I saw Jack and Rose. They weren't alone. Their team was with them. It was lunchtime and they were likely heading to eat together. Rose was lively, her face adorned with a playful smile. She stood facing Jack, animatedly gesturing as she spoke. Jack, smiling gently, watched her with tender eyes, occasionally glancing behind her to ensure she didn't collide with others. When she almost bumped into someone, he grabbed her arm to guide her aside. It felt both familiar and foreign. After our breakup, Jack seemed genuinely happy. I stayed in the taxi, watching their backs disappear into the Cantonese tea restaurant downstairs before averting my gaze. The driver in front, intrigued, asked, "Are you secretly in love with that tall, handsome guy?" I chuckled and explained, "That's my ex-boyfriend." His expression shifted instantly from curious to awkward, as if he wanted to comfort me, but didn't know how. I kindly added, "It's fine. It doesn't affect me anymore." When I entered the company, Bella greeted me with joy. "Summer, you're back from the hospital? You didn't even let us visit you." I smiled as we walked. It was nothing serious. Besides, here I am, perfectly fine. How's the debriefing on the Hong Kong case coming along? She followed me to my office, handing me a stack of printed documents. Glancing around the office to ensure no one was nearby, she leaned closer and whispered, "Summer, don't look at the data yet. I have something to tell you." I put down the papers and looked at her. She seemed inexplicably indignant. "Summer, you know Albert is leaving next month to manage the LA branch, right? Everyone's saying that once he's gone, the director position will likely be between you and Jack. Over the years, your performance has been neck and neck. Honestly, we'd accept either of you getting the position based on merit." But, she hesitated, her expression torn. I smiled gently. "It's okay.
Just say it."
It's only the two of us here." She hesitated before finally blurting out, "But a few days ago, I saw Jack hugging Rose in the pantry." Rose being rumored as our boss James Smith's daughter wasn't a secret in the company, which explained Bella's anger. She likely thought Jack's methods were unfair. I rolled the edge of the papers in my hand, suddenly finding the situation ironic. So, when I was in the hospital, clutching my phone and wondering why Jack hadn't responded, he had been wrapped in warm, fragrant embrace. But honestly, it wasn't surprising. I smiled bitterly and reassured Bella, "It's okay. Personnel decisions are made by higher-ups. Let's focus on our responsibilities and let things unfold naturally." Bella sighed, and I lowered my head to review the data. When Jack knocked on the glass door of my office, I was surprised. Despite our amicable breakup, I never expected us to casually chat or pretend to be normal colleagues. Unless necessary, I assumed we'd avoid private communication altogether. That was until I learned why he came. Standing before my desk, tall and composed, his gaze rested on me briefly before he spoke. "Summer, I thought you would resign." His tone was half advisory, half a warning. "Summer, we were together for 7 years. Don't say I'm ruthless. Albert is leaving next month, and one of us will be promoted to take his place as director. If I were you, I'd plan ahead and secure another position elsewhere." I understood his implication. He was confident he'd get the promotion and was advising me to resign to avoid future complications. Once he became the director and his girlfriend, the boss's daughter, was by his side, he'd likely push me out to avoid rumors. This friendly warning was his way of advising me to leave on my own terms. That I stared at him as if seeing a stranger. Then, for the first time, I swore, "Jack, you're trash." He accepted the insult in silence. My first direct interaction with Rose came a week after this conversation. After breaking up with me, Jack, who had always used "office relationships are inappropriate" as an excuse not to make our relationship public, openly got together with Rose. I saw their lovey-dovey posts on social media, filled with countless blessings from our colleagues. Only a mutual friend from our university days messaged me on WeChat, shocked, asking what had happened. I didn't reply to any of them. The day Rose confronted me was an unremarkable afternoon. Most people were either out for lunch or resting at their desks. I was in the pantry alone, grinding coffee beans, as the rich aroma of coffee slowly filled the air. Suddenly, Rose appeared behind me. I stepped aside to let her pass, but she didn't move. Instead, she stood in front of me, her gaze scanning me with a curious, almost smug look before abruptly stating, "I know you used to date Jack." Rose had a baby face and was shorter than me. I lowered my gaze to meet hers, my expression calm, with a slightly raised eyebrow that hinted at confusion. She continued, "I saw the playlist he named after you and the line, raising sails to collect starlight, hoisting anchors to catch the moon. Your so-called secret relationship wasn't so secret." I remained silent, patiently waiting for her to finish. She added, "My father really admires Jack. You know, Jack is young, accomplished, driven, and dependable. My dad says Jack reminds him of his younger self. He wants to mentor Jack, and Jack's future is boundless. It just so happens that I like him and he likes me too, but Summer Jones, your presence is quite inconvenient. I hope you have the decency to resign voluntarily." Finally, her intentions were clear. First a veiled warning, then intimidation, and finally a gentle nudge for me to leave on my own. I held my coffee cup, my demeanor calm and my tone steady, even slightly amused. Looking down at her, I replied, "Miss Smith, any personnel changes in the company must follow proper procedures. I'm not sure if you're here to fire me or for some other reason. If it's to fire me, the company policy is clear. HR should inform me of the reasons. And as for managerial positions and above, personnel changes require approval from the chairman himself. In this company, only the chairman has the authority to fire me. And Miss Smith, you're just an intern in Jack's department. Perhaps you're overstepping your bounds." Her face turned pale and then flushed. Perhaps she hadn't anticipated my firm stance. I left with my coffee cup, not bothering to spare her another glance. Not long after my exchange with Rose, the official announcement about Albert's transfer to the LA branch was released. Before his departure, the chairman, James Smith, hosted a farewell banquet for him. All the department heads were invited, essentially the company's key players. Everyone knew that apart from bidding Albert farewell, the banquet would likely confirm personnel changes within the headquarters' core departments. When the HR manager placed the invitation on my desk, Bella, who I had personally mentored, looked distraught. Slumped over her desk, she first cheered me on and then solemnly said, "Summer, no matter what happens, our team will always have your back. If things don't work out here, we'll follow you to wherever you go." I chuckled, tapping her forehead lightly with the invitation, and replied gently, "What nonsense. It's just a dinner. Have you forgotten my life motto? Build bridges where there's water, carve paths through mountains. There's nothing to fear. Besides, I'm not going to lose." On the day of the banquet, my emotions were steady. In the private room, the heads of the marketing, management, HR, finance, and operations departments gathered. James Smith sat at the head of the table, with Rose on his left and Jack seated next to her. When everyone noticed Rose, they exchanged discreet glances. What had once been mere rumor was now confirmed. This intern, sitting beside the chairman, was indeed his daughter. However, James Smith did not explicitly introduce her, and everyone pretended not to notice, refraining from asking any questions. I sat next to Fence from the finance department, maintaining proper decorum. I ate, drank, and engaged in polite conversation when appropriate, staying silent when necessary. The topic of the evening wasn't business, but a celebration of Albert, acknowledging his contributions to the company and wishing him success as he took on the LA branch, until the meal reached its third round and most pleasantries had been exchanged. James Smith finally set down his chopsticks and brought up the real purpose of the dinner. At just over 50, he was well-maintained, his vigor closer to that of a man in his 40s, his sharp eyes scanning everyone seated before him. After dabbing his mouth with a napkin, he began, "Tonight isn't just about bidding Albert farewell. There's another matter to address." I placed my chopsticks down and looked at him, catching a glimpse of Jack out of the corner of my eye. He wore a faint, polite smile, the picture of an accomplished and composed young man. Sitting next to him, Rose also smiled, and the two looked well-matched. I lowered my gaze, picked up a towel, and began wiping my hands with deliberate care. James Smith's voice was calm and measured. "As you all know, I have only one daughter. When she first graduated, I arranged for her to join the company. She's always been strong-willed and didn't want anyone in the company to know her identity. She wanted to work her way up from the bottom." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Over the years, she's done well. I've heard many of you praise her in front of me, and I'm proud. Now, with Albert transferring to LA, I think it's time to formally introduce her." His gaze settled on me with warmth and quiet pride. Stretching out a hand, he said gently, "Summer, come over here." It's time for everyone to meet you. I calmly placed the towel back on the table and smiled. In the deafening silence that followed, the only sound was the clatter of Jack's water glass tipping over. I glanced toward him and saw his expression remained composed, apologizing as he mopped up the spill with a napkin, his movements steady and unhurried. Yet his face was slightly pale, his eyes betraying some emotion I couldn't decipher. I looked away and didn't spare him another glance, not even in passing. I simply stood, walked toward the head of the table, and stopped beside Rose, who had gone visibly pale. Placing my hand lightly on the back of her chair, I politely said, "Miss Smith, could you please move aside?" A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the room. After the dinner achieved its intended purpose, it quickly wrapped up. I could already foresee the storm this revelation would cause within the company. But my curiosity lay elsewhere. On Jack, he had once said to me, "Summer, people always aim for higher ground." I wondered if he still believed himself on that ascent now. I didn't glance his way as we dispersed, not even sparing him a flicker of acknowledgement. But when he and the visibly distraught Rose came over to bid my father goodbye, I heard his subdued, restrained voice. "Mr. Smith, Miss Jones, we'll be leaving now." I stayed silent as my father's piercing gaze lingered on Jack and then shifted to Rose. After a pause, he chuckled lightly, his tone casual. "All right, take care." Once the room emptied and the last person left, the smile on James Smith's face gradually faded. He turned to me, his eyes sharp with inquiry. "What's the story with you and Jack?" Yes, I had mentioned Jack to him once, fresh out of college. But I never told him we were involved. With his experience, he must have pieced it together anyway. I smiled faintly and met his probing gaze with calm detachment. "Didn't you see? Rose took him from me." Her mother excelled at stealing others' relationships, and clearly, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. I paused, deliberately emphasizing the next word. Father. The last time I had called James Smith father was when I was 7 years old. Back then, he had just divorced my mother. At the gates of the villa, I tugged at his sleeve, repeatedly asking, "Dad, why did Mom divorce you? Say something." But he said nothing. As a child, I didn't understand. It wasn't until I was older that I grasped the tangled web of grievances between adults. James Smith and Rose's mother had been childhood sweethearts. She looked down on him for being poor and married someone else, while my mother supported my father in building his business from scratch. After they succeeded, Rose's mother returned, newly divorced, and bringing Rose along. That time, James Smith, still young and prideful, harbored resentment over being spurned for poverty. Yet, the more he resented, the harder it became for him to let go of the past. My mother, ever poised and dignified, never delved into the messy details in front of me and always maintained his image. She was graceful in her departure, decisively divorcing him when betrayed. But even after the divorce, James Smith never married Rose's mother. He merely supported her financially while mocking her past short-sightedness. Rose's original surname wasn't Smith. It was Miller, likely in an effort to win his favor. She had her surname changed to Smith when she was just 8 years old. She and her mother, who shamelessly took what wasn't theirs, were walking on air with their success. They didn't know about me, but I knew all about them. I found out when I was 8. Secretly returning to the villa without telling my mother, I saw James Smith celebrating Rose's birthday. He held 10-year-old Rose in his arms while her mother stood beside him, all three of them smiling as if they were the perfect family. After that, I never called James Smith Dad again and rarely saw him. Jack only knew that my parents were divorced and that I took my mother's surname, changing my name to Summer Jones. After graduation, James Smith invited me to join his company. His exact words were, "I haven't had any other children all these years. There's only you. Doesn't your mother understand? You're my biological daughter. Everything your mother and I built belongs to you. Who else would I give it to? That aunt of yours has been trying to get her daughter into the company, but I've blocked it every time. Summer, your dad knows where his priorities lie. My mother is a proud and noble woman. When she divorced James Smith, she only took what she was entitled to, not a penny more. But I'm not like her. Why should I give up what is rightfully mine? The more it upsets others, the more joy it brings me. So, Jack and I joined the company after graduation, starting from the bottom in the core business department and working our way up. James Smith knew about Jack, paid attention to him, and even praised him as a promising young man, probably because I had mentioned him before. Family dynamics in my case are complicated. I had planned to explain everything to Jack on the day James Smith made things official, but instead, Jack surprised me first. James Smith looked at me, and for the first time, I saw weariness in his expression. He sighed and said, "I owe you an apology, Summer." I chuckled. It's just the nature of men. Rose's words came to mind, what she said when she came to the break room to provoke me. She claimed James Smith thought Jack was just like him when he was younger. And they are indeed alike, in their callousness, their tendency to abandon others once they've crossed the bridge, and in their poor judgment. 3 days later, I returned to the company. By then, even the juiciest gossip had been digested. When I returned, everyone acted as if nothing had changed, though their smiles were a bit warmer. These seasoned professionals knew exactly where to draw the line. It was a relief, really, and I maintained my usual demeanor. Only Bella was upset, scolding me for keeping her worried all this time. It took a seafood dinner to placate her. As she cracked open a lobster claw, she asked, "You're the real heiress. What's Rose supposed to be?" I didn't hide the truth and gave her a condensed version of the story. Bella was stunned. My God, there are really people this shameless in the world? Pretending to be the boss's daughter? It's disgusting. Summer, a lot of people have been gossiping to me while you were gone. Can I spill the beans? I can't stand Rose acting so high and mighty. If it were true, I wouldn't care. But for her to be a cat pretending to be a tiger, what's she so smug about? I smiled and casually handed her a piece of lobster meat. It's not exactly a secret. If someone asks, feel free to share. I didn't underestimate Bella's ability to stir things up. By that afternoon, everyone in the company knew about Rose's true background. Later, I went to the finance department for project approval and saw Rose standing in front of Fence's desk. Fence frowned as she pointed at the reimbursement form. "Why are you claiming a handbag as a business expense? This won't be approved. Also, I suggest you review the other claims carefully. Personal items shouldn't go through company accounts." Rose's face turned sour as Fence spoke, but she took the form and left. As she passed, she shot me a venomous glare, as if I were behind all this. I said nothing. After James Smith revealed my identity, I began overseeing all company operations, gaining a clearer understanding of its overall development. Naturally, Jack didn't get promoted to director. Albert continued to manage operations remotely from LA. With my managerial position vacant, the company brought in a seasoned manager from another firm to fill my role. Bella still needed more experience to take on that level of responsibility. Once the personnel changes were confirmed, many colleagues sent me messages of congratulations. Except for 2 people, since my return to the company, Jack and Rose have been avoiding me, whether out of guilt or for other reasons. There's really no need for that. I'm too preoccupied with navigating the complexities of company affairs to spare time or energy worrying about them. After all, we are fundamentally not the same kind of people. But perhaps they don't see it that way. Rose approached me first. Same empty break room, same coffee beans, but her expression had shifted from arrogance to anger. Standing behind me, she spat bitterly, "Hypocrite." I ignored her, so she pressed on. "Your mother left, pretending she didn't care about anything, claiming she'd sever all ties forever. I really thought you two weren't interested in the Smith family's assets. But now look at you, so fake, pretending to be all above it while sneaking back to fight for your share. If you really looked down on Dad's wealth, you should have stayed far away. What a disgusting double standard." Her words made me laugh. And I did laugh aloud. Frankly, I dislike dealing with foolish people, Rose being a prime example. Bella once asked if I had any plans to bring Rose down. No one would believe it, but I've never thought about targeting her. There's no need. As long as she's in the company, others will naturally make her life difficult. She's not my opponent. She doesn't even qualify. I looked at her calmly, as if observing a clown. "Rose, Don't say such silly things again. Look at how upset you are. I'm merely reclaiming what's mine, yet you act as if I've torn out your heart. If I were you, I'd go home and advise your mother to think of new ways to win James Smith over. It's pitiful, really. After all your years of fawning and scheming, all you have to show for it is a paltry monthly allowance and no property to your name. But don't worry, now that I'm in charge, I'll make sure that allowance continues. Consider it payment for your efforts to please him. Her face turned pale, then purple, then pale again. But suddenly, she smirked, as if finding a weapon to strike back. I cannot talk you, Summer Jones, but let's not forget, your boyfriend of 7 years is mine now. I didn't even look up. Trash belongs in the trash can. If he's yours, he's yours. What's there to brag about? I imagine Rose might genuinely like Jack, but she probably sees him more as a means to an end. As one of the youngest department managers, with James Smith's favor, Jack likely represents a stepping stone for her to secure a firm footing in the company. From that perspective, they make a good pair. Two people mutually exploiting each other, overestimating their worth, and ultimately ending up empty-handed. The thought amused me. I decided I'd had enough of her antics. Looking at her with polite indifference, I said, "This is the last time I'll be civil with you, Rose. I hope you'll learn to keep a low profile in the company. Otherwise, I assure you, my patience has limits." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but unfortunately for her, I'm not Jack. I have no interest in pitying her. Standing there with a faint smile, I admired the tears in her eyes, finding them oddly satisfying. Jack's resignation didn't come as a surprise. I couldn't imagine any reason for him to stay. He followed the standard process, and I didn't intervene. It wasn't until the day he officially left that he sent me a message asking if we could talk. I didn't see what there was to discuss. The night James Smith publicly revealed my identity, Jack had also called, saying he was waiting outside my building. But that week, James Smith had me staying at the family estate to familiarize myself with the company's interpersonal dynamics. I didn't return to my residence, nor did I reply to his message. Later, he wisely refrained from bothering me further. This time, however, perhaps because it was his final farewell, even though I didn't respond, he still came to see me. I've always admired Jack's composed demeanor. It's a trait successful people tend to possess. He could feign as if those disgraceful betrayals between us had never occurred. His calmness was so convincing that it made me question whether my memory had faltered. With his sharp, stoic features revealing no discernible emotion, he stood at the door, smiling as if we were old friends, and asked, "Shall we talk?" I remained silent. He stepped in and handed me a cup of coffee. I took it. We stood side by side in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The night had fallen. The towering skyscrapers were ablaze with lights. Gazing out through the clear glass, it felt like standing amidst a galaxy of stars. I heard Jack sigh beside me. "Do you remember when we first started working here?" That was nearly 5 years ago. Two fresh college graduates standing in a similar high-rise, looking out at the glittering city lights. Back then, he was brimming with ambition, ready to make his mark, only to be assigned the most insignificant grunt work. Later, he secured a $1 million deal through his own effort. I still remember the sight of him clutching his stomach in pain from drinking too much alcohol, his face pale, yet glowing with excitement as he looked at me and said, "Summer, I'll give you a home in this city." That deal, however, ended up being credited to his boss, and all he received was a $500 bonus. With that $500, he took me out for hot pot. Across the steaming table, his expression was obscured by the mist, but his voice remains vivid in my memory. It was the first and last time I saw confusion and bewilderment on his face. He asked, "Summer, when will we ever make it big?" After that meal, I went to see James Smith. Ever since he divorced my mother, she hadn't seen him again, let alone used his money or resources. Even though he gave me a limitless credit card, neither my mother nor I had ever touched IT. IT was my first time asking him for help, for Jack. I still remember James Smith's expression of surprise and joy. He was undoubtedly pleased that I had come to him, but I also recall his meaningful words, "Summer, if someone can't even handle something like this and needs my help, He doesn't deserve to be my son-in-law. Although he said this, he still took note of Jack and praised him a few times in public. Favor from above acts as a guiding beacon. Jack's career naturally took off afterward. He was clever and capable. What I hadn't expected was how, on this path of maneuvering, we had grown so far apart. He, like an ancient scholar seeking favor, wanted to ascend to greatness through the affection of a princess. Perhaps, in his mind, that was the true meaning of success. His voice drifted in from the gaps of past memories, tinged with a nostalgic sigh. How did we end up like this? I chuckled. Jack, don't try to play the sentimentality card with me. I understand your earlier actions, seeking a better perch, but now, don't make me look down on you further. He smiled too, tilting his head to look at me intently, but said nothing more. After a moment, his smile slowly faded, replaced by a trace of seriousness. Can't we even be ordinary friends? Summer, I betrayed you, and you kept things from me. Doesn't that make us even? Jack. I sighed, meeting his gaze with complete indifference. I don't know what you mean by even. Your idea of even is based on the fact that I'm James Smith's daughter. Have you ever truly considered, if I weren't James Smith's daughter, what would have become of me? When I watched you secretly courting the daughter of a major corporation's chairman, whispering sweet nothings, I would have been left with no choice but to resign under the pressure of your power and influence. With a non-compete clause in effect, I wouldn't even have been able to work in the same industry. All my years of effort, my work, my struggles, all would have become nothing but stepping stones for you and Rose to bask in your happiness. When I was wandering the streets, lost and broken in the cold wind, you and Rose were probably enjoying the best days of your lives in the city's high-rise buildings. Jack, now you tell me, are we even? How do you think we could ever be even? I watched his face turn pale and blank. Smiling faintly, detached yet polite, I said, Jack, there's no such thing as even. What you owe me, you'll owe me for the rest of your life, and I have no intention of magnanimously forgiving you. From now on, dust returns to dust, and earth to earth. If we meet again, we'll be nothing but strangers. Having said that, I no longer wasted time indulging him. Glancing at my watch, I said courteously, you should leave. Jack's departing figure was unsteady, a sight of vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. But this was the path he had chosen for himself. Later, I ran into Jack once or twice at industry summits. By then, I had already taken over James Smith's position, receiving admiration wherever I went. Jack stood on the outskirts of the crowd, starting over at a new company and climbing step by step. He no longer even had the right to speak to me. Later still, while dining with James Smith, I heard him casually mention Rose's romantic affairs. He said she'd been deceived, losing both money and dignity, completely lacking sense. I didn't know when Jack and Rose had broken up, but for two people brought together by interest, separating for the same reason was no surprise. As I held my teacup, gazing at the blooming garden, I realized spring had come and gone again. Past memories had long drifted away, like a light boat crossing 1,000 mountains.